Um, so if you guys don't mind, if you'll just join me in a word of prayer, and then we'll begin. Um, Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for just the opportunity to come here to learn. We thank you for your grace and your mercy and your love toward us, God. We know that human trafficking is a part of our world, a part of our society. It's horrible and it's tough, um, but the awareness about it needs to be raised, God. And we thank you we can do that at our church. We thank you we can do that with open minds and ears and hearts um, to receive some of this information. And then hopefully we can be lights afterwards. We can raise an awareness about it, oh Heavenly Father. We can continue to pray for those in this horrible system, that your gospel might penetrate it. And ultimately, we just want to be bringers of hope. So we thank you, we love you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so a fundamental principle that affects all of our lives is supply and demand. From what we eat to what we wear to where we live, it affects all of that. Our needs and demands dictates the way the world operates around us, and many of us just assume that supply and demand is just an economic principle that's just kind of parsed out and nifty graphs and charts and trying to get to the bottom line. And of course, that happens to be correct. But what happens when supply and demand becomes the overarching way that you see life? And then the overarching way in how you value human life. So we're going to talk about that today. Leads into the discussion about human trafficking. And human trafficking is just the sanitized way to say slavery, right? Modern slavery. A lot of people think that slavery is some kind of antiquated, archaic notion that, was abolished from American history, once Abraham Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation, and that's just the end of slavery in the United States. And that's just not true. Slavery continued on after that, and it continues on even into this day. It's a horrible part of our society, and not a lot of people want to talk about that. But slavery is common, and human traffickers generate hundreds of billions of dollars. I didn't say hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions. I'm saying hundreds of billions of dollars. It's one of the most lucrative, illegitimate businesses that is among us. So we're going to talk about that today. So human trafficking requires three parties. It requires a supplier, the buyer, and the product. So if anybody wanted to wager a guess, who would be the supplier in this model? Who's the supplier? There we go. Pimps, traffickers. All right. Who's the buyer? Right. Typically the men and or women who have a demand for labor or sex. And who's the product? There we go. The people they see as a human commodity, not as a human being, but as a human product. So when criminals sell guns or drugs or anything like that, that's a one-time sale, right? That's a one-time shot. You have a gun, I sell it to anybody. I sell it to Liz over here. And then my profit for that gun is done. Or if I sell drugs and I give it to Austin, that drug deal is done, it's over with. I'm selling them the couple rate, of course, for the drugs and the guns and drugs. But if I'm selling a human being, I can sell that person over and over and over again because I own them. I can sell them for forced labor. And if it's for sex, you can sell that person over and over again, several times a night, several times in the lifetime that you have that person. So this is why they see it as a very lucrative model. So I'm going to start by saying, I'm going to talk about some really hard facts about human trafficking in all aspects. It might make you a little bit uncomfortable. I'm going to reveal a little bit about myself to you, might make you also very uncomfortable. However, I think awareness is needed for this topic. Transparency is needed for this topic because the church right now is turning a blind eye to it. And until we can really approach this in an open and honest discussion, the problem is going to keep being pushed further and further down deep. Now, I'm not going to tell you I was a trafficker, if that's what anybody's worried about here. I'm not going to say that. But the point I'm making is that there are different points in the road that all of us, maybe, possibly, I'm not going to put that, some of us, I retract that, some of us are a part of this human trafficking train, okay? And I want to highlight some of those things. So first, what is human trafficking? So basically, human trafficking is the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining a person for compelled labor or commercial sex acts through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. Okay, so most people in here, you know I like to give movie analogies or talk about movies. So what is the popular movie about human trafficking? More especially sex trafficking. Taken. Everybody knows that, right? So when, no, not everybody. Okay, some people. So here's the premise of Taken, right? We have Liam Neeson, grimacy Liam Neeson over here, and he is separated from his wife, his ex-wife, and he has a daughter. The daughter wants to go on this trip. She wants to backpack through Europe and follow this band around. He feels like that's not a great idea, but the mother has already said, yes, you're gonna go. So she goes with her friend, and they first start off in Paris, right? Who thinks anything's bad gonna happen in Paris? They're probably just gonna see the band, or they're gonna do some touristy things. Not the case. The spotter for the trafficker sees both young girls getting off together from the airport to get into a cab, placed into the cab. Then they go to the young girl's little apartment, her friend's apartment, where they're gonna stay, right? They follow them up to the apartment, they raid the place. The girl, however, is on the phone with her dad, Liam Neeson, who has a special set of skills, right? So she's able to kind of talk to her dad, and he hears some of the voices, and because of his special set of skills, he's able to track them down. But this is not just a Hollywood, like concept, right? These things can really happen. Human trafficking happens to regular people. It's not a problem just overseas. It's not a problem in some faraway country where some natives or poverty-stricken nation. It can happen here. It happens in A-Leaf, human trafficking. Girls on their way from school are abducted and picked up, and they're never seen from again. And they're from all walks of life. They're from all economic bases, all right? Young girls, young men are picked up for forced labor and sex acts. So what we have to come to grips with is, this is not a their problem. This is an our problem. So, and there's just not one type of human trafficking. There are different types of human trafficking. So that's what I'm gonna go over right now. So there's forced labor, there's sex trafficking, there's domestic servitude, there's forced marriage, and there's organ trafficking. Okay? So forced labor. This is a very common type. This is probably one of the most common types because forced labor does include sex trafficking. It just has some nuances to it. So I'm gonna give you a situation. So you have a construction company. You don't want to pay a lot of people a lot of money. You go over to another country, or you may even come here. You may target a young boy, right? You hold him hostage. But I'll give you the more common thing. You have a construction company in Houston. They have a big contract for cleanup for Harvey, right? Go over to Mexico. They'll go and they'll promise, oh, I can give you educational benefits. I'll pay you. We have this huge contract for 10 years for you to come work in Houston. And by the time that 10 years is up, you have brought your whole family over. You can send money back home. And this sounds like a good deal to a person who wants to provide for their family. Heck, that sounds like a good deal for me if you tell me the right amount of money. And so they come over here. And the moment they get here, they take away their passport. Or they tell them they're not going to help them out anymore. They're not going to give them education. They put a gun to their head, they've taken a picture of their family, and they say, you work for me now, or I'm going to go back and kill your entire family. That's forced labor, guys. And so the guys that you see at the Home Depot or on the side of the road, not all of them are here illegally because they want to be. They're here illegally because they were sold a bag of goods. They were sold a dream. Okay? Sex trafficking happens the exact same way. But sex trafficking is typically just with women and children. All right? And this can happen here or abroad. Like I said, there was a rash of this lately, actually about 3 years ago in A-Leaf. Young girls walking home from school, all of a sudden, never being seen from again. Teachers know this, campus officials know this, but it's an ongoing problem. Domestic servitude. This is one that's not really widely distributed, right? This happens in private residences. So if you see domestic workers or nannies who are told and brought over here for reasons like, okay, yes, we're going to give you sponsorship, we're going to give you education, we're going to give you money, and they're brought over to these private houses, once again, their information is ripped from them. They're mentally abused. They're locked up. And then they're broken. And so when they come out of this brokenness, now they become that rich family's nanny for free. Or they become their housekeeper for free. And because we have a certain perception of people, we don't ask. All of a sudden they have a nanny. All of a sudden they have a housekeeper. We think that's none of our business. And then the person may not even speak English. So that's another issue. So they really can't communicate that now they've been kidnapped. Now they're in domestic servitude. Forced marriage happens the very same way. Promised a better life, brought over here, forced into a marriage that they didn't even know they were being forced into. A lot of them come over, a lot of women come over for job opportunities. But a lot of women over here also into a forced marriage because he's going to take care of me. He's going to provide an educational balance for me or stability. Doesn't happen. And organ trafficking, which I didn't know was such big business. But 70% of organ transplants are kidney transplants. And more people are being diagnosed with kidney and renal failure. It's because of our diet, the way we eat, whatever. But there's not enough kidneys to go around. There's not enough altruistic people who are willing to just donate a kidney. Now, we'll give blood. We'll give blood. But a kidney, which if you known anybody who is on dialysis or renal failure, you know that they're hooked up to a machine for 8 to 12 hours. And if they don't get that poison out of their system because their kidneys aren't filtering it anymore, that's a life sentence, and that's a terrible way. So they're willing, because in every country, I believe Bangladesh was the last country that had legal organ distribution. But now every country has banned organ trafficking. And so now people are willing to go to the black market to buy a kidney. $7,000 per kidney. Doesn't sound like a lot of money if you can raise it, and then you have a better chance at yourself living, right? But what about that other person who's given up their kidney? Typically, they come from other countries where the healthcare is not that great. So they've been promised, or they have a debt, and they say, we'll sell your kidney, and then you'll get this amount of money. Well, what the trafficker does is gets the kidney and doesn't give them the money, pockets the money for himself, themselves, whomever they are. And this person is left, typically, a lot of times they die. A lot of times they die after giving it because they don't receive the same health care. But this person over here who has received their kidney really doesn't have that to worry about. They're saying, well, I'm doing this person a favor because they were indebted to somebody and now they have a better life, and now I've given this person more money than they could make in a year, maybe 2 years. But they've also now condemned them to a death sentence. So who are the targets for human trafficking? Victims of human trafficking can be any age and any gender. Women or children are often used for sex exploitation, while men are most likely used for forced labor. And globally, 1 in 5 victims of human trafficking are children. children. And I'm not saying this to scare people, to do fear mongering. What I'm saying is this is a real issue. So if we take our 2-year-old's room, one in five of them most likely would be kidnapped for sex trafficking. It's a strange number. It's a strange number when you take it like that. But why would they take the kids? Well, for the purposes of forced begging. It's not always as it seems of this like child pornography or child labor. But if a child is on the corner begging with a parent, that looks more appealing, right? I'm more likely to give that child that person money, and that child might not even belong to that parent. So, and these are the kind of the questions I'm going through as I'm researching this topic. So, why does human trafficking still exist? Well, first of all, it's a lucrative business. Like I said, it gains $150 billion in illegal profit per year. So along with illegal arms and drug trafficking, human trafficking is one of the largest international crime industries in the world. It's highly, highly networked and thought out. So when the authorities catch the little shops on the corner, you're catching a small fish. You're catching you're catching somebody at the end of the web. You're not catching the big spider who's controlling the whole web, right? So that's why it continues to go on. And they're like, I can lose that person. I can lose this outlet. I can lose this shop because it's a $1 billion industry. Next thing, just the depravity of humanity. Corruption, civil unrest, a weak government, lack of access to education and jobs, family disruption and dysfunction. All of these things are leading to the reason why human trafficking still exists. A lot of people have just the one conception that it only happens in poverty-stricken countries and only to people who are poor. Now, that's not the only reason, but that can be a high risk. That can add to a reason why this person might be subjugated into human trafficking. So where does this happen? It happens everywhere. It's a global issue. Every continent, every major city, there's some human trafficking. Domestically, where would we see this? We would see this in Texas, Florida, New York, and California. So I'm going to give some statistics real quick on human trafficking. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are around 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally. 81% of them are trapped in forced labor. 75% of them are women and girls. 25% are children. And so Polaris is what the U.S. goes on the human trafficking numbers. So they don't even have an official estimate of the total number of human trafficking victims, but they suppose it reaches to the hundreds of thousands. Once again, it's because it's underreported. A lot of people aren't talking about it. A lot of people, it's become a hot button issue of late, but really not. Like, we think about it and we think it doesn't happen. It's not going to happen in my neighborhood. It's not going to happen with my next door neighbor. And there's an interesting book that I'll cite later. It's called The Slave Next Door. The Slave Next Door. And this was a prominent neighborhood. A prominent neighborhood where the person could have afforded to get to get some higher domestic help. They just chose not to. Why would I choose to when I can kidnap somebody? And they're not going to tell anybody. They're not going to say anything. They can't even speak English. So here's a big question. So why should we care? Well, human trafficking is a growing problem in Texas, but it's a huge problem in Houston. So there's around 230 plus thousand that are estimated victims of labor trafficking in Houston. 84,000 are estimated cleaning workers who are in labor trafficking. 78,000 are estimated as minor and youth sex trafficking victims. 60,000 are estimated kitchen workers in restaurants for labor trafficking. 36,000 are estimated migrant farm workers who are in labor trafficking. And around 35,000 are estimated for construction workers who are in labor trafficking. So like I was saying before, labor trafficking is a huge issue, and it's not just sex trafficking. And I think because we have this idea of the foreigners that we see in our neighborhoods, we have these preconceived notions that they're here and they're, the media or whatever your personal conviction might have been, and we might be afraid to say that, that they're taking jobs from us and they're doing this and they're doing that. And really a lot of the people that you see are being trafficked here illegally, don't want to be here anymore, miss their family, and they're being held captive. So why is Houston, why is Texas big hub? Well, here's some contributing factors. Our interstate system. Who knows where I-10 runs from and goes to? There we go. Goes from coast to coast, right? And where's the largest chunk of I-10? Texas. El Paso to Louisiana, right? Then we have the Port of Houston. The Port of Houston is one of the largest ports in the world, not just in the United States, but in the world. So many goods and product comes in and out of the Port of Houston. Then we have an international airport, huge international airport. What's another reason that leads to it? Well, diversity. The thing that kind of brings people to Houston, the thing that we're most proud of, that we're so diverse and, everybody from every different nation. But this is a contributing factor to human trafficking. Because when you bring someone in from a different country and different nation in Houston, they blend in. They don't stick out. So last week I was in Madison, Wisconsin for work I was doing. And needless to say, they don't have a large black population there, right? So I go out to eat and I'm just around town. I'm in half-price books, but people are friendly. They're not like standoffish or whatever. But you could tell that there are not a lot of black people who go to their half-price books over there. So the guy was like, "What are you looking for? I don't know if we have, black writer section over here." And I'm like, really? I'm looking for sci-fi. And I'm looking for a fantasy book. Actually, I was looking for one of my favorite authors, Peter Beagle. And I was looking for one of his books, and they didn't have it. Imagine that. I was in Madison, Wisconsin. They didn't have it. But I bet if you started bringing a large number of Asian women, other Hispanic women into Madison, Wisconsin, some ears would raise, right? A large number of African women in there, it would probably bring attention. But we do that in Houston and everybody blends in, right? And because of the diversity, the men who are willing to pay for these services are the women, but typically men paying for these sex services, they have diverse tastes in the women who they would like to be with. So this is another reason. Job opportunities. Thriving economic markets are in Houston. Big boom for textile and construction and agriculture. So there are huge labor markets here. And if you are a contractor, I'm not just speaking against contractors, I'm just saying this is where it happens a lot. If you're a contractor and you have a big bid for a contract, you don't want to use all of your money on paying someone. So a lot of times they'll pay people under the table. And if they really don't want to pay people, they'll just get labor trafficked people in. They'll hire a coyote, like you said, and they'll bring men here illegally and promise them a better life and promise them a better experience and promise them money. And then once they get here, they take all their goods away from them. They break them mentally. And when I was reading about that, it really did bring me to tears. Because think about it. I mean, I'm a working man. So, and there are opportunities for me to travel and to work. So what if I was to take an opportunity overseas? What if I was to say, you know what, this job is paying a whole lot of money for my family, and I wanted to go overseas. And once I get there, after having a legitimate interview with a legitimate company, I go over there and they put a gun in my head. They have a picture of my family. They take away all my goods. They take away my clothes. They take away my luggage. And then they tell me, now you're working for me. And I have no recourse because I'm not from this country. I put myself in that situation when I'm reading these stories, and it's gripping, and it's horrifying, and it's terrible, and it's so easy for us to sit back in our comfortable houses and our comfortable jobs and say this is someone else's problem, and it's really not. And to think that slavery has gone away, and it really hasn't. Yeah, thank you. So this first story I'm going to share is. It happened right down the street, actually, right on Willcrest and Westheimer. If anybody knows where that Popeyes is and where that Fitness Connection is, this is where this happened.
A story we first told you about during our newscast at noon today. 139 people arrested in a sex trade sting operation in West Houston. One of them, an undercover Houston police officer. Tonight, he spoke with our Roseanne Aragon. She joins us live now near where that operation went down with what he had to say. Roseanne?
That's right. We're not releasing his identity for the safety of his family, but he was very upfront with me. He said what he did was wrong, and he is willing to pay the price for his actions.
These are people that should be ashamed of themselves.
It was a 10-day operation at a location that police say was known to be involved in illicit sex trade. Nearby workers say it's changed names multiple times.
It gets a lot of foot traffic, a lot more than the gym, and it's constant.
Police believe the tenants who vacated in September of 2016 ran a full operation. Houston police worked with the landlord to set up shop.
Upon entry, buyers were greeted by an undercover officer and escorted to a private massage room.
139 Johns were arrested for buying sexual acts, all men from all walks of life.
Sadly, I want you all to know that a member of the Houston Police Department was caught up in this sting.
A 31-year veteran of the force assigned to the car theft division. He told me, what I did was wrong. It was a mistake and I regret it. I will be punished and I should be punished. He's not alone. Police said they also arrested a Homeland Security Investigations TSA tech working with FEMA and a Sheldon ISD teacher. Both the teacher and the officer are now on paid administrative leave. The officer is out on bond. He tells me he will plead guilty. Reporting live, Roseanne Aragon, KPRC, Channel 2 News.
Okay. Yeah. So no, that happened right down the street. Right down the street. It's actually at the gym that I work out at, right up the street from my house, right down the street from the church. 139 men over 10 days in a sting operation. So once again, that's 10 days. That's not a month. That's not the 5 years that business was there. That was 10 days. So this is start. And once again, this is not the only place. Houston, that they know of, has over 300 places like that. So when you see the Thai foot massage place or this kind of like off the grid restaurant or whatever, it can be anywhere. You know, it could be the kitchen help that has labor trafficking. It could be the construction company. It could be the maid service that you get your maid from, your cleaning service from. And the only way to combat this is with awareness and asking the right questions. So we think this is apart from us. Like, we have never been a part of any of the moving parts in this sex trafficking ring. So here's a story. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. When I was in high school, it's funny because it's slightly embarrassing. I'm telling a room full of people this. But this is where I first got introduced to going to strip clubs. And yeah, you're right. Hi, Beth. And of course, I'm 16, so I can't be there. I shouldn't be there. However, my friend had an older cousin. I think Brian maybe in my orientation class when I was telling this story. No. He was. Anyway, right, we go way back. Long story short, I didn't think anything of it. I thought this, just as a rite of passage, as a man, right? You go to these places, you take in the view, and then you go home. Not realizing that years later, that same first place, that same first strip club that I went to, was highly saturated in sex slaves. I didn't know that. The name of it was called I-10 Cabaret. It was in a similar sting like this, and it got shut down, fortunately. But in thinking of this, you think you're so far removed in your life from these incidents, from like ever being a part in it, and especially men. So if men have ever watched X-rated videos or streamed X-rated things, you're part of the problem too. A lot of those women have been coerced, kidnapped, abused, and subjugated to this sex trade. And now it's a video that you can buy for your own pleasure. So really, it goes back to the supply and the demand. If people weren't demanding these kinds of tapes, this kind of content, if these men weren't demanding this kind of treatment from a massage parlor, this wouldn't be a problem. But it is a problem, and it exists. And until hearts are changed by that, people are willing to open up about their demands and their problems and their issues and what they're going through, it will never be changed. So here's another one. Sandra Bearden of Laredo, Texas. This was a 28-year-old woman. She did have a lot of money, and she didn't have a lot of time to take care of her daughter and clean her house. So she decided she was going to go over to Mexico, and she poked around a little bit, and she talked to a family, and she convinced them that she was going to take their 12-year-old daughter for a better life. She was going to educate her along with her daughter and possibly give her a chance at college. But when she brings the little girl over there back, she kidnaps her. She locks her into the basement, starves her for days, then brings her back up and says, "Now you'll work for me. And if you work for me, I'll feed you." And so she proceeded to keep this little girl for 3 years. You can read this. You can read about this story. When they found the little girl, it's just terrible. She had chained her outside. Chained her outside in a little house outside, and had fed her feces. The depravity of humanity. All because she wanted someone to cook for her. This is in Laredo, Texas. Domestic servitude. The young woman's name is Maria. She has now been reunited with her parents, but she will never be the same. And this is a long clip. You can go back and watch it if you'd like to, but I'm just going to play the first minute and 30 minutes. 30 seconds.
Human Trafficking Survivor Empowerment Program in New York, and I also a member of the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, and human being. In 1998, political turbulence and religious persecution happened in my country, Indonesia. I was a financial analyst, so my imagination, if I talk about the United States, that is full with the goodness. It is an American dream for me because of the power of US. So when I work in the bank, I know exactly that the US dollar control economic, politics, everything convert to US dollar. I was excited. Didn't get the job back. And I think for 6 months seasonal job in the hotel. So I went to this employment aid. I paid $3,000 and I got a job. At 5 months, you know, when you are living outside the United States, what we see all about a good thing, about the pizza, about the sandwich, about the movie. In the movie, they show you. One day, the employment agency called and said, this is the time that you have to travel. I got my ticket, passport and visa. So the excitement is I will work 6 months and I will go back to Indonesia for my daughter because of the money is for her college fund. I was smiled. I went to the airport and I flew to New York City. The employment agency promised someone will pick me up and I didn't worry. At the arrival in the airport, someone has my picture and called me, "Are you Chandra?" And I said, "Yes, I am." Excited, right? Someone recognized you. And then this person, who is Johnny Wong, told us we will not go to the workplace. My imagination workplace is in Chicago, hotel in Chicago that they promised.
So I'll recap Chandra's story for you because it's long, but you can go back and watch it if you'd like to. So like she said, her job was supposed to be in a Chicago hotel. She flew into, she says it later, she recounts it later, she flew into JFK and was like, I should have flown into O'Hare, but you know, this is where they said my meeting point was. So anyway, they pick her up and they transfer her and other women who they also promised the seasonal job to 4 other cars. So they get in one car, they get in another car, they get in another car, they get in another car. Finally, they separate them and then they take her up there. They take all of her possessions. She recounts this. They beat her. And then that night, they begin to break her. And countless men come in there and have sex with her. So now just imagine this. You're a financial analyst with a child back home. She recounts the shame that rushed over her now. And now she's trapped in sex trafficking. She's trapped in sex trafficking until she finds a way out. She finds a way out. She immediately escapes. She escapes when she goes to the restroom and the restroom has a window. She unlocks the window, she climbs out and she runs away. But now she's homeless. She's homeless in New York. And she says just her fortune, she runs into another sex trafficker, another pimp. Picks her up, she's still in sex trafficking. The thing that saved her was she was soliciting sex in a park. And this guy was like, what's going on? Somebody cared enough to not just write her off as another prostitute. He cared and said, what's going on here? This guy named Eddie. And she told him, I've been kidnapped from Indonesia and my pimp is making me work in this park. He immediately calls the police. And then he comes back and he says, the police are gonna meet me here this afternoon. So then she waits patiently. She really has no hope and no trust, but she's depending on this. So she goes back to the park and the police come and pick her up. And she says, where are we going? And he says, we're going back to get the rest of the girls from that trafficker. Somehow she remembers, she's like, somehow I remember where they all are. And they go and round them all up. Her story was so touching back then that President Obama made her part of the advisory council for anti-human trafficking. But not everybody is going to end up like Chandra. Not everybody has that fortunate story. Where am I at? Yes. So here we go. What are some ways of combating human trafficking? Well, typically they subscribe to the 3 Ps method: prevent trafficking, protect victims, and persecute traffickers. So one of the real obstacles with this is we make systems for people who are getting out of sex trafficking, right? Which is needed, which is needed. But how do we know when someone is actually in it? How do we know when they're being trafficked? We live such isolative lives that we're not like Eddie. You're not out on the streets and approaching homeless kids who are begging or prostitutes who are soliciting sex, because you're trying to get away from them as quickly as possible. Like Brian says this in the theology of danger. That's not safe. This person is unclean. I'm not going to touch them, or I'm not going to talk to them. They're out here because they must want to do this. She must want to sell her body. This is where she's come to. That's not really the case. So what they're seeing is that a large number of the convictions for human trafficking is increasing, but unfortunately not proportionate to the growing awareness and extent of the problem. There are several reasons for that. There's an absence of anti-trafficking legislations in some countries. Sometimes the legislation exists and law enforcement doesn't care enough to prosecute. And in some instances, victims may not cooperate with the criminal justice system because they've been threatened by the trafficker. Or there's some huge shame surrounding that. Imagine having to tell someone that you have had sex with so many men, hundreds of men over the course of months. You would feel like you're trapped in that. I don't care where your background is. If someone has violated you to such an extent, your mind and your body, you would feel hopeless. So then I would suggest one more P. Preach the gospel. Preach the gospel to anybody and everybody. So here's some obstacles in the mission efforts. Lack of awareness. I know this was the case for me. I was not aware that human trafficking was such a widespread issue. I knew about human trafficking. We hear it in the news, but I'm not thinking that the bus boy and the kitchen help and the construction worker and the cleaning person could all be trafficked. I'm thinking maybe the woman on the corner selling her body, and then we minimalize that. We joke about that, you know? And then we say, you know, she's a sex worker, so in this age of consent, she must want to do that. That's her vocation right now, and that's not the case. Isolation. The women are isolated. They're run on a black market scheme. The men are there for one reason. They don't care about them. They don't see the value in them. They don't care about the children. The people with the companies don't care that these men are away from their homes. They just want to get the work done. We live isolated lives. Inadequacy is a problem. I've never been a part of sex trafficking. I don't know even how to begin the conversation. That stops you right there in your tracks. Lack of prayer. We don't pray for these people because it goes back to awareness. We don't know about these people. And really, if some of us are honest, it's safer not to know them. It's safer for us not to know them. But is it loving for us not to know them? And fear. Brian talked about it wonderfully. I don't even have to recap on that. Yeah, so we live in a fear-driven society. Everything from when we're young. And I had to, when I was reading that and remembering that, so everybody knows I have a little girl, her name is Harper. And Harper at 2 years old is fearless. Just like Jack, they want to do any and everything. They climb any and everywhere. And, you know, we think we're trying to do them a service by protecting them. But really what we do is we implant fear into them. and we implant it from an early age. And I had to have this conversation with my wife. I mean, yes, Harper is small, and she is running in a parking lot. But there are no cars around. So don't yell at her, she's going to get hit by a car. Right there, fear. Right there. Implanting implanting a notion and a worry and an anxiety that doesn't exist in this current moment. Now, if there was a car, hey, watch out for the car. But that's where irrational fears come from. They're implanted in us at early ages. So, and this is why we don't want to talk to these people out of fear. You don't know what they're going to do to you. They could have a gun. They could be on drugs. They could be crazy. Disengage. So I'm coming to the end of my time here. But I just want to talk about a biblical parallel. So in the book of Genesis, 14 chapters are dedicated to the story of a human trafficking survivor named Joseph. So Brian touched on that earlier. But Joseph was trafficked by those he trusted, like most of the people I've talked about. His own brother sold him for 20 shekels of silver. And once in Egypt, he would be sold again to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, to be the laborer as a domestic servant. So most of the examples that I share with you today, we can see in the story of Joseph. Forced labor, domestic servitude, and at the hands of Potiphar's wife, sexual exploitation. But despite those circumstances, the Lord was with Joseph and he became a successful man. Genesis 39 and 2. But what can we take from this story? Rejected by his brothers, God chose him to be their deliverer. And in this same way, Joseph foreshadows Christ, the true and better deliverer who would save those who rejected him. So takeaways. The first one, human trafficking is an offense to the sanctity of human life. Like Brian said, all human beings are made in the image of God and thus are valuable. From conception to natural death, women and men, girls and boys, rich and poor, every ethnicity, regardless of education level, are valuable. It is therefore sin and an infinite sin against God to force another human being into such dehumanizing and demeaning acts. Human trafficking illustrates the perversity of our fallen world. And human trafficking reveals our need for the gospel. The gospel is all we need, and it is needed by both the perpetrators and the victims of human trafficking. Because I think that's the segment that we leave out. Those 139 men that we saw on that raid, they need the gospel too. Just as much as those victims of what they perpetuated on them. Because it's in those hearts that it can be stopped. It's in those hearts that awareness can be raised, that forgiveness can be sought, reconciliation can be sought, and that a new movement of people can stand up against this horrible, horrible slavery that's continued to go on in the world today, and more especially in Houston. So once again, now you have a heavy token. I've given out the information. I've given you awareness now, which is a heavy crown to wear. So now what are you going to do about it? Are you going to remain silent? Are you going to remain safe? Are you not going to talk to people? Are you not going to talk about it? Or are you going to actually do something about it? Are you actually going to respond in a Christian way to protect those and pray for those who are needy and broken? So that's my time.